Hello and welcome to Novelty Show episode 14, Earning Your Ending. Today we're talking all about endings and how you get there, how you make sure that it's a satisfying ending. I'm Kat. Hi, hello. Let's do the introduction.
I'm Alexa. My channel is Alexa Dunn.
And my name is Lainey, and my channel name is Ginger Reads Lainey.
And we are Novelty Show. We have a podcast and a Patreon and some other fun social media stuff that everything will be linked down in the description. So yeah, should we get into it? Let's throw to Alexa. What inspired this episode? Because you're the one who came up with this one.
I am. I was inspired by how upset everyone is by the ending of Game of Thrones, the TV show. Mm-hmm. No spoilers, don't worry, we're not going to talk about spoilers, but just about the general feeling of fan disappointment. And I think it illustrates a really important point for writers, for storytellers, that you really can get away with any ending as long as you earn it. And when you don't do the work and the necessary steps to earn it, you get really angry fans, angry readers. And we want to kind of dissect how that happens and how to avoid it.
Right. I think it's a common issue in particularly young adult series. It's like I personally have found very few finales that have been like truly fully satisfying to me. Like most of the time I'm just like, that was fine.
Yeah. I feel that way about most TV shows too. It was fine.
But why is the ending so hard?
Endings are really hard. And also just on kind of the practical side as well, like before like a book actually comes out, I've heard very often that agents who read fulls, that most of the time it's an ending falling apart that leads to them not offering on a book. And like sticking your landing is so critically important, but I mean, every part of the book is hard, but endings are hard in a very particular way.
Do you guys know your ending before you start writing it? And how much does it change from the final draft?
It's a really good question. Personally, it depends on the book. I always know the end of my emotional arc, but my thriller's the first book where I knew like the ending, kind of. But there's still stuff that came after that I had to invent, the denouement, which we're going to talk about, which is one of my favorite things to talk about for endings and why I think it's missing from the Blake Snyder beat sheet, but whatever. Yeah, that's me.
I see, that's more what I know. I know my resolution. I know like how the overall story ends and like what kind of feeling I'm going for at that end point. So I can like properly construct my arc. I know my beginning, I know my end, I can figure out the middle and like all the parts in between. But I usually don't know how I get there. Like I'll be like, it's a big fight scene and the good guys win. And like, that's what I know of my ending. But like when I actually get there, I have to do the work and I have to figure out like, how do they win in a satisfying way that's still like interesting and exciting and that like really completes the story arc. Like I need to go from this point to this point and I don't know how to do that part. And that's the ending.
Yeah, I think I have always changed my endings through different drafts. Like when one of them is from a strategic standpoint of wanting to get an agent. So I know not to end on a cliffhanger, even though I used to always end on cliffhangers. But I do also try to get the emotional ending before I start writing it. But even though I consider myself like a plotter of some sorts, I usually have no idea what the ending is going to be, like the actual plot ending.
Interesting. See, I have like a snapshot in mind. Like I have my opening image in mind and my closing image in mind. But I don't know anything like immediately before that closing image. It's just like, that's where we want to end up, but how do we get there?
I never have the closing image in mind. I struggle with that. I figured out later. But let's talk about like some endings that disappointed us. Let's get a little specific because I think examples are actually the most helpful, even though it's tough to talk about actual books or stories where we didn't like the ending. But I think we should dig into why endings don't land, why an ending might not feel earned. And one that's big for me. No, I'm going to save it. I'm going to let you guys go first while I contemplate how I'm going to discuss this book.
Well, I mean, I'll just throw it out there. I feel like a lot of people did not like the ending of Allegiant. And I think one of the biggest reasons is because, I mean, it's hard not to talk about spoilers, but
Right.
I feel like everybody was kind of collectively upset by this thing that happened at the end. And while that thing happening,
I think you can spoil the book. I mean,
okay, everybody, I'm gonna spoil Allegiant. So Triss dies. And I think,
well, and it's a big character choice, so I think it's important to talk about, because I think character endings are sometimes the biggest thing that leads to someone hating an ending of a book. If you leave the character in a place that doesn't feel organic or earned.
Yeah, and I think one of the, well, first you kind of know because it's dual point of view when you go into it. You're like, what's this? What's going on here? And then when Triss dies, it just feels so like she didn't earn that death in a way. Why she sacrificed herself. And it's been a really long time since I've read it, but I just remember being mad about sacrificing herself for someone who was kind of so, I mean, important to her in some aspects, but I just felt like that's who you're going to sacrifice yourself for. And I don't know. It's also the fact that, I mean, we've been with her through this whole journey, and for her to kind of go out like that, I just felt so betrayed as a reader. And I'm fine with character deaths as a whole, but that one, for some reason, just wasn't executed well.
Well, exactly. It sounds like it wasn't earned for you as a reader, in large part because of character development. And I think you're right. If you're going to set up someone to die for someone or something, you have to build up that arc.
And I mean, also the execution is so important. Like, I didn't love the character death in Allegiant, but I would have been okay with it if it had been executed a little bit differently. Like, if it actually mattered. If I recall correctly, she died because she was trying to stop like people's memories from being erased. And like, that didn't seem enough like life or death. Like, I'm willing to sacrifice everything for that. I just didn't care about all these randoms and like them losing their memories or whatever was going to happen. And also just the general tone of the book was a little bit messy, I felt, because of the dual point of view. That this is one example that we mentioned in the point of
POV video.
Yeah, that I did not think that the dual point of view was done very well. I thought the voices blended together too much, and that took away from my enjoyment of the book and just like my overall satisfaction with it.
Yeah, and I'll talk about one of my big disappointments. And it's funny because we can talk about endings on two levels. There's the ending to a series, which can be an entire book. And then there's the literal just like ending to a single book. And another one that is really, I've never been happy with is Harry Potter. I really hated Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows.
Really?
Oh, yes. Oh, come at me. It felt like a first draft. It honestly felt like the first thing JKR turned into her publisher. But because by that point she was JKR, it's just partly just knowing the way publishing works, I can tell it was a first draft. They published the first thing that was turned into them that they could lightly copy edit. And I still found errors in my copy. Meaning, like, I have problems with the entire book. Like, structurally, I think it has a pacing problem. But I loathe the epilogue. Like, let's talk about a literal ending. And something that can happen, whether authors like it or not, is your ending can be too pat. Your ending can be too convenient, too happy, and it can be really clear when an author was basically like, I just want this to happen, and I'm going to do it no matter what people think. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you will never convince me Harry Ginny is okay. I'm just going to die on that hill. Hello, hi, nice to meet you. But I thought the epilogue was cheesy. I don't think it fit the series. I hated it. And you could also tell she had written it like 10 years earlier when she was a more amateurish writer. Sorry, I have so many feelings, but that's the thing. Like, all this build up, and I got camping. I got a book about camping.
I wish I could comment, but I haven't read it, so.
What?
That's a good choice, Blaney. Okay. I only read it once, and I'm still mad. I've read all the other books more than once.
See, I just read Deathly Hallows for the second time a couple weeks ago. And So I don't agree completely. Like, your views aren't my personal views, but I absolutely understand your perspective. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about.
But also, especially, I read this in 2007, like, meaning this was after years of buildup, being in the fandom and waiting years for books, and this is what you give me? If I read it now, I might not hate it as much, but I'm not going to read it because I just don't want to make myself unhappy. Also, I don't like camping. I don't know. I'm going to move on. It's fine.
So I want to mention a series. I don't think I'm going to mention it by name because I don't want to spoil this entire series if people want to read it. But I want to talk about one aspect that I was disappointed in the ending. So in this trilogy, there's a girl who disguises herself as a boy. And I really love that trope. And one sort of expectation I have with that trope is that there's, you know, the moment where she's revealed that she is a girl disguised as a boy. And like, we get that fallout, that moment of like, oh, dang, like she's been lying, like we have to deal with all these consequences. And this trilogy didn't have that moment. Throughout the whole trilogy, like a couple people found out here and there, but like she was never, her identity was never actually exposed at the end, which was an interesting choice. Like, I didn't hate it. I was just like, I wanted I wanted that moment of reveal and those consequences. So it was a little disappointing in that way for me. But overall, good trilogy.
So essentially, the certain tropes come with certain expectations.
Yeah, that's what it was for me with this one.
Well, and so that kind of plays into another thing that can really not land in an ending that's worth talking about. And all of these kind of relate to Game of Thrones, kind of. Meaning, I'd say, again, I'm not going to do spoilers or talk just exclusively about it, but it is such a great example of, it's like face planting on the ending. It's incredible. And it's, of course, because the author isn't writing it. That's why authors are great. Showrunners, hit and miss. We've talked about characters feeling like where they end up isn't earned. The choices, the big dramatic choices they make that you need for a big ending don't make sense. That's a big one. And then you're kind of like, in not hitting the beat on the trope, it's screwing up the plot twists. Like, in certain books, you expect that moment. Like, this is where I get disappointed with thrillers. So I think it's actually really common for a thriller to mess the ending because it's all about how you build up your plot twists, how they land, and how you deal with them. And something that drives me insane, like the one that, it's one of the only books I openly discuss how much I didn't like it because I'm comfortable doing so. And it's The Lion Game by Ruth Ware. And the reason I'm comfortable doing it is because all her other books are 5-star reads for me. Like, I love her dearly, but that book, she fucked it up. Sorry, language. And it's because she blew her twist. She didn't execute it right. She basically, once you get to it, you're like, there was nothing in the book that could have led me to this. This feels out of left field. And also, it's dropped on you in a telling scene. It's literally dropped on you in a scene in a diner where one person is basically telling the other people at the table what happened. And I hated it. It was basically, she info dumped the twist and it didn't feel earned. And I'm still pissed off about it. Like, I still have like very passionate feelings about how badly she messed this up. But I think it's a really great example. You have to, whatever your plot twist is, you need to drop it. And yes, you do need to explain it, because I also hate it when a book drops a twist on me and then the book ends. And I'm like, excuse me? I have so many questions. What the hell? Because if you have a book with twists, any kind of twist, it has to hold up logically. Like, I firmly believe that. And if it doesn't, I will burn your book to the ground. So you both have to explain the logic to me, but if you info dump it on me in a really boring way, I'm going to hate you. I have so many feelings. Hi. Yeah. But that's the thing. It's so easy to screw up an ending. And a huge one is like having one character vomit information at another is a really common pitfall.
Yeah. I think another thing, particularly with Game of Thrones, because I'm actually not hating this season. Like, I don't have a problem with what's happening.
I don't either.
I just feel like they're a bit rushed.
And that's the thing. They don't feel earned.
Yeah, we have like foreshadowing and seeds planted, but then it feels a little like some of these storylines are kind of skipping their second act almost. It's like all set up and payoff, and we don't see the the growing pains and the change of like getting to that point. Which I feel like it could have been solved with like a few more episodes and like some breathing room.
Another season. Like the showrunners like, no, we want to end because Star Wars. And HBO meanwhile is like, no, take our money, make more television. And the fans are like, yeah, that would have been better. Because exactly, it's like they're missing a second act. You're absolutely right. And really,
I don't agree.
Give us your feelings, Lainey.
Because I know that Lainey is enjoying the season too.
Yeah, I mean,
Lainey, gosh.
I really do love this season. I mean, there was like one storyline that I was kind of disappointed in, but
I know which one.
I don't think you do, because I actually agree with everything that's going on with Danny. I'll leave it at that.
Oh, that's not the one I was thinking of.
Is it Jamie?
Yes.
Okay,
I have so many feelings, and we're not going to talk about it.
I don't have a lot of feelings, but I just feel like the Earn thing didn't really happen for me. But overall, like, I don't know. I feel like maybe some people haven't been watching because of the big gap. I think that built too much expectation and hype, and we feel like we're not getting these things. But I feel like if you watch season 7 and season 8 all the way through, you might feel differently. Once the season's already out and it's done, if you watch season 7 and season 8 back to back, I think there's going to be a huge difference in people saying things are rushed. I do think it could have used a couple more episodes, but that's just for me as a fan wanting more. But overall, they're ending it. I'm satisfied with how they're trying to end it. And I think I really can't form a true opinion of Game of Thrones until this last episode airs. And I can reflect back on the whole season.
Yeah. I see my issues with things that I feel are rushed are more just about like specific character situations. Like overall, I feel like this is where the story is going. Like,
well, and that's the thing. I saw a really fascinating thread on Twitter that I think really nailed it. And I think it's a great example of how endings can fall apart, but from a writer's perspective when you're putting it together. And it just calls for flexibility in the writing experience. And they were basically comparing and contrasting how George R.R. Martin is a famous pantser. I know this is our age-old debate. It's fine. And the showrunners are clear, and the writing room, they're clearly just more plotters. And when they ran out of books, they started writing around their organic writing process, like approaching it from a plotting perspective. And so they had an end game, and they've been plotting towards it, which I get. But it's really hard to switch from a character-driven pantsing style story that's all like about long, meandering, organic character development and switch to a fast-paced plotting-based one. And I think that's why we felt a real shift in the last couple seasons, because it's been like, well, we have to hit these plot beats. So what are we going to do to get them to the plot beats? Whereas George R.R. Martin in the books, and this is also just something you can do in books that is harder to do on TV, he would shift and change his plot stuff based on where the characters led him. And it's just different styles clashing and colliding. And I think that when you are writing a book, regardless of what your writing style is, so let's get away from plotting versus pantsing. Let's just talk about plotting. I think it is possible, and I think we've all done this with our ending before, where we write the ending that we want it to be. And it's not until later, usually after a few people read it, and we get mad at them for telling us what we don't want to hear. And then we realize we've shoved our book into the ending we wanted, and it's the wrong ending.
Okay, so that really reminds me of How I Met Your Mother.
That's another really good one, actually.
Like that is the prime example of, when the writers started this show, they had an idea of an ending in mind. That was the ending of the show. And over the course of however many seasons, 6 seasons or so, the characters changed and grew in different ways where that ending wasn't natural for them anymore, but it was still forced upon them.
I mean, that's how I feel about Harry Potter, clearly. Only the epilogue. It's fine. I'm fine. It's fine. But no, I agree completely. And I think that usually when there is a strong reaction from fans, and I think Allegiant is another good example, and I don't think that was a case where the end was planned from the beginning. And
no, I don't think, if I recall correctly, Veronica had only outlined book 1 when it sold. Or not even
so I think it can happen both ways. You cannot plan something and still force your characters into it, or you can plan something from the beginning and force characters who don't fit anymore into the ending. But either way, you have to do the work to make it feel organic. So your comment about missing second acts was really interesting to me because I think the second act is actually hypercritical to endings.
Yeah.
Because that's where you show change.
That's why the second act is so important and so hard, because it's the critical part of the story. You can't have only setup and only payoff. You need growing pains in the middle.
You know, I've had like a totally different outlook on middles after I watched your video on it, Alexa. Like how you said, it's basically the promise of the premise. And after you like said that, it like totally unlocked like the saggy middle for me. And I'm like,
middles are so hard.
But they're supposed to be the fun part. So like, yeah. So like
but it's hard to pull off because it has to be fun but functional, but they can't know that it's functional. You have to hide it from them. You have to be sneaky. So like in a thriller, it's the investigation, it's stuff. You have to weave in the clues so that it's not obvious. Or like in a romance, it's all the good romance stuff. Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. But same thing, it's where you show character growth and it's where you show character change. And it is the critical place to insert whatever it is that's going to earn your ending. It goes in the second act. Because you'll go, oh, that makes sense for how they grew and changed as a character and their core values. Or not.
And the thing is, stories are all about change. Like there's exciting there can be action and like cool scenes and like beautiful writing. But at the core, they're about how a character changes. Like people read stories to see, how would that person react in that situation? Like they want to find out like what happens and how this person changes and navigates the situation. So to kind of jump the changing part, like you need to do all the work of actually changing to get there, and it's hard and not like it's complicated. It's a complex thing, but it's the most vital part of the story.
Another thing I like to just touch on briefly that I think can happen where endings don't work, and I'm bringing this up because I've done it, talking about my own sins, and that is when you have a tonal shift for your ending. I think this is less common, but meaning something that I've certainly done is to have a big dramatic ending, I've gone full soap. And part of this I also think is just like when you're caught up in drafting and you're going mad because you've been writing an 80,000 word novel. And I think endings are always bonkers to me because like I'm just so desperate to finish that sometimes it ends up interesting. But meaning I've seen this happen where it's clear that the author never examined what they did and hasn't revised it or fixed it, where you'll read a book and then at the end it's literally like there was a soap explosion and everything is all of a sudden over the top, melodramatic. And the reason the ending feels off to a reader is it's like, where the hell did that come from? And so I think it's something to point out because I've seen this a lot on the like querying writer end, where like you'll be reading a book that is pretty well plotted and things are making sense, and then it's like a soap opera like vomited on the ending, and it's like it's tonal whiplash for the reader. And I think that's another thing that to definitely look out for, because you either have to change the tone of your whole book so that it fits the ending, or change the tone of the ending to make it feel more grounded.
Yeah, I think one of the things I struggle with on the endings part is having it feel too rushed. I think that for me is one of the most difficult things I'm working on, because it's always like fast at the end, and then it just ends. And I have to like pull that all out a little bit longer.
Oh, let's talk about denouement. It's my favorite thing. I call it the calm after the storm beat, which it doesn't exist on the beat sheet. And whenever I talk about beats, I insert it because I'm like, you have to have the moment after the insane big ending where the characters breathe and reflect. And very often this is the scene where you have some third character who comes in and explains everything. And it can be well done, by the way. Like, I hated the way it was done in The Lion Game, but I've read books where it's done well, meaning it's like everything happens and then like the mentor character comes in and like, well, I never told you, but your mom, blah, 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 blah.
I was going to say, the early Harry Potter books.
Dumbledore.
Dumbledore does that all the time.
Dumbledore, like, explaining the ending.
But, like, you need that basically the exhale moment where the reader can like exhale before the closing image. And I've noticed that a lot of books skip that. They go right from, and then we arrested him, and then they died. And the next thing you know, it's like final scene. And I'm like, no, too fast.
That was my main issue with Mockingjay. Like I didn't have any problems with like any things that happened. I just felt like the ending was a little bit too rushed. And I was like, Katniss is just like chilling like for a while, just doing nothing. Like why? What is
the movie kind of does that too? Now that I'm thinking about it, they kind of rush the ending a little bit, or there's just like a lot of waiting around.
Yeah,
I don't know. There's like
it's like waiting around with no purpose. Like it was like we need a calm after the storm, so let's just have her sit here for a while.
I think the pieces are in Mockingjay. I just think they're too short. And that's another thing. You can have the scene, but if it's only 500 words when it needed to be 1,500, the readers will feel that. Because technically when she's in the hospital afterwards, that is the moment. But then it immediately goes to the big finish after that. Well, I guess it depends on what you think the big, like, are we doing spoilers again? Because like, I think of it as like the big thing is Prim dying. And then your calm after the storm should be when she's in the hospital, but it's actually a very short section. Yeah. And then the assassination. Spoilers, it's fine. It's whatever. It's been out forever. It's fine.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. When I first read it, I didn't like it. And maybe I should reread Harry Potter. Don't make me. Mockingjay grew on me when I read it years later. So our feelings about endings can change too.
Yeah, I think you should read Harry Potter 7 again. Maybe the audiobook or like give it a try. Because like I was expecting the camping to be like a much more significant portion than it was, and it was shorter than I imagined it. Because like for my first read, I was just like, this is unending. They're just camping forever. But coming back to it, and like I was expecting them to be camping forever, and it was like shorter and more interesting than I expected from memory. So
it was still the wrong choice. I will die on
but I also think, Alexa, you're a huge Harry Potter fan. You were in the fandom with fan fiction and everything, and I think that kind of, and maybe you were, Kat, but I don't feel like you were as much. But like, is there a sense where fans feel like they kind of own it, as like they own it just as much as the author does? Because I feel like the ones that are the most upset are the ones that are very entrenched in the lexicon of.
But my problems with it weren't about fandom. Like, I can joke about Harry Ginny, but fine, whatever. Like, convince me. She didn't. No, she broke the structure of her own novels. Every single Harry Potter book takes place at Hogwarts, and it's structured around the school year. And I think it lent an essential structural backbone to her writing. And when she didn't have it, I think her pacing suffered. See, I've processed my feelings into smart writerly feelings since I read it.
I can see that, but I get what Lainey is saying. Like, maybe it doesn't apply in this situation. But like, I remember when
I think it's impacting Game of Thrones, though. I think part of the disappointment is years of fan theorizing and entitlement.
Yeah. Like when the fourth Twilight book came out, when Breaking Dawn came out, I didn't start reading that series until all 4 books were out, and I read them all together. So I didn't have time to like get invested in any fandom or form any theories or predictions or have any expectations. So I had like, I wasn't upset by the ending of Breaking Dawn. But then I saw fan reactions, and they were like, this is crazy. Like, everything that happened was shit, blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, so they had like really different expectations. Like, I was just along for the ride. It also depends on like what kind of reader you are in that moment. Because like, that was at the point where I'm just like, I go along with anything. Like, I don't really have strong opinions about endings. Like, I don't know what I would do. I'm still like really learning, but yeah.
And in fairness, it is subjective. And that's fair too. Like, there are people who hate the ending of my book, and I'm like, man, I'm fine with it. Whatever. It's probably rushed though. It's fine. Someone actually asked about rushing your ending. I think that's actually really interesting to talk about, because aside from just like disappointment, etc., pacing, it is true. Rushed endings, I would say, are one of the biggest problems when it comes to like getting representation, for example. So do we want to like maybe break that down and talk about just literal pacing of endings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not great at endings are because
let's all just admit all of our faults. I also tend to rush my endings. Maybe it's just a club we're all in.
Yeah, because by the time you get to that point in the book, you're just like, I want to be done.
I wanted to die.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of my pirate book, and it's literally action, 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 closing image. That's it.
Oh, Lainey, we need to talk.
It's something I know I need to work on, but I'm like, I think it was also kind of what Kat was saying. I was just like, I just want to be done. And I know it needs work, so I'm just going to rush just to get it over with.
Well, and in fairness, I think that's something just like a nice thing to like reassure writers. I'm pretty sure all first draft endings are rushed.
Oh.
And you can fix it later.
I write the ending in my first draft. I like leave the last 10,000 words off because I need the first like 90% to be solid before I can do that last part.
I've done that before too. And actually my thriller is the first book where I didn't do that, where I didn't go back to the beginning to edit before I finished.
What are your tips? It was writing endings and pacing.
Right? I don't know if it's any good. I'm waiting on agent feedback. Hi, no clue. Well, okay, practical. So I have a villain confrontation scene. Most of us do if we're building that kind of story. I made it twice as long as it could have been. Meaning, as I was writing it, I was like, I think I'm rushing. So I added another reversal. I came up with it on the spot. I was like, I need something else to happen to shift the status quo in this confrontation scene to make it more interesting. Also partly because I needed more time for my villain to monologue, but I didn't want them to actually like literally villain monologue. I had to break up all of the confessions. So yeah, I just added more reversals to that big confrontation scene so that it wasn't as short. We'll see if that worked. I have no clue. None whatsoever. And another thing I did personally, I don't know if this is a cheat. Maybe it is. I've done it in all 3 of my books. We'll see if anyone calls me on it. I love epilogues. Because what's nice about an epilogue is an epilogue can be a tonal shift in the sense that you can have everything be garbage and all shit break loose. What I like about epilogues is you can skip forward in time to touch in with a character after you give them time to emotionally settle in the imaginary world of your story, and you can deliver tying up loose ends and happy endings in an epilogue. And I've done that on all 3 of my books. I might have a problem.
I've never written an epilogue.
I never thought I would, and then I keep doing it. Yeah, I mean, and here's the thing. Technically, they could all just be called chapter XYZ. I think the only one that is like blatantly, obviously an epilogue is Brightly Burning. Technically, The Stars We Steal and my thriller, you could just call it chapter 35 or whatever, but I'm an ass, and I like to be like, it's the epilogue. It's very fancy.
I think it's almost safer to err on the side of doing too much because you can always cut back. Like, I think it is harder to like, oh, your ending is rushed. Now I have to expand it. How? So yeah. But someone in the comments mentioned the Lord of the Rings film, which has like a very long, drawn out ending. So you guys have
8 million endings. I think it's 9.
I mean, the thing is, I'm biased because I feel like I watched a video recently that was about the Lord of the Rings endings and why
I watched that too. I think it could have been Just Right. I think they did a video.
Just Right. Yeah, it might have been just one of those YouTube channels. Mm-hmm. And like, I thought that was really interesting because like Lord of the Rings is such a massive story that has so many character arcs. So like we're experiencing like the endings for like each of these different storylines has like a different ending, and they're not all layered together. Some authors like they layer the romantic beat climax and the action beat climax, like the internal character beat climax, like all on the same point, which can be a very explosive big ending, but you can separate them a little bit and give them a little bit of breathing room and like close out each story like one after the other.
I think that's a great tip, honestly.
Depends on what story you're writing, what you're going for. Like, do you want the big explosive ending or do you want something more drawn out?
Because that is actually something I did have to do with the thriller. Come to think of it, I didn't know what my calm after the storm was, but I had to write 2 of them because I realized I had 2 separate characters that my main character had to have emotional resolution with. So I had to write 2 separate scenes, which turned into 2 chapters, because I couldn't do them at the same time. I thought about it. I was like, could I? And I'm like, no, it's messy. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you can draw out your ending just by making sure you have emotional resolution with any characters your character needs that with. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, isn't that the thing about endings? It's emotional resolution. I think is a huge part of having your ending work. It does have to feel earned. It needs to feel organic and satisfying to the reader.
I think that's why the calm before the storm and the calm after the storm are so important, because that's where the character moments and the emotions happen. A book ending, like the climactic action point of where like the final drama goes down.
Mm-hmm. I know we don't have experience really writing this, and Alexa, because you have standalones too, but I think it's interesting about different writers that feel like they need to satisfy fan expectations.
Fan service and expectations. I mean, fan entitlement's definitely a thing.
Yeah, look at the 1 million people trying to get them to remake Game of Thrones season 8.
I would like to introduce them to the concept of fan fiction.
Right?
And same thing, like literally, so Harry Potter, the epilogue kicked off an entire, like a division in Harry Potter fandom. It was actually a pretty fun time to be alive, where there were EWE fics, epilogue, what epilogue? And it was fun, honestly. And I did a challenge thing where we were given like a challenge assignment, right? And I ended up on a team that had to work around the epilogue. And I was so pissed at first. And then it was really fun. And I love that fandom and fanfic. You know what? You don't like the ending? Deal with it in fanfiction.
Do you think as writers, you guys will adhere to different fan services in future series? Is that something you would want to do?
Oh God, just the idea of having that many fans.
Yeah, that's stressful. That's really
stressful. Very stressful. All my ideas are standalones too.
I'm thinking of like Shadow and Bone, and I feel like a lot of people didn't like that ending. I personally did like I didn't love it, but I understood why she ended it that way. But I know a lot of people.
Cassie Clare got into a problem with this as well for her series. Didn't she do some ending to the one with Tessa and William that people hated?
I haven't read it. Some people might have disliked that because they felt it was a little bit of a cop-out, but I thought it was...
I recall her doing a sassy Tumblr post about how it was her books. I just recall that.
Well, the thing is, Cassie Clare gets a lot of fan entitlement.
Oh, I know.
So, yeah, but I don't know.
I think it's tough.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, writing a series sounds really scary to me because I don't like outside ideas influencing my work. So, like, I would want to write the entire series before even the first book gets published. So that, like, you know, if I write the first book and I'm working on the second, while I'm getting, like, reviews of the first, I'm going to be like, oh, I should change this. Oh, that person, they hate that character. This character should go away. And, like, I'm worried it would really affect how I write, and maybe not in a good way, but maybe I don't know.
I think it's a tough issue, and there's a fine line because sometimes your readership, your fans, can really identify and pinpoint things that you hadn't thought of, and it can be good to shift to them. So, for example, I'm just gonna use Harry Potter. It's fine, whatever. I really wish J.K. Rowling had noticed that, like, we all loved Luna, and that Harry Luna would have been a better ending to the series. And maybe she shouldn't have stuck to her guns on her end game. I'm fine. I'm not bitter. It's fine. But no, like, I think your fans can actually pick up on things that you never would have thought of. It's surprising what they latch onto. And I think listening to them can be good and bad, so to speak. Yeah. Trying to make them happy. You'll never make them all happy, really.
Yeah. True. I'm like, I've seen several theories for Game of Thrones season 8 that didn't happen. Like, I saw them before, obviously, the season. And like, I thought they were, like, a lot cooler than, like, the direction we ultimately ended up in. Like, I don't hate where we ultimately ended up, but, like, there were, like, interesting theory twists that could have gone down that I would have been here for.
And then it's tricky because I've heard the theory that specifically Game of Thrones, I've heard this theory for other series as well, and including books, that the authors intentionally don't do what the most popular fan theories are because they want to subvert expectations. And I'm like, just because someone guesses it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, because maybe it was still a really good idea.
Yeah.
So I think there's both ways. Like that's a big one I've heard, that exactly that they change things. I'm trying to think. I feel like I've heard that happen in other fandoms as well. Well, I mean, I'll stop with Harry Potter. Sorry.
But
there was
also,
a crackpot
crack-
fandom theory that the reason Remus ends up with Tonks randomly in book 5 is because JKR wanted to shut down puppy shippers. Putting it out there.
Yeah.
That's Remus theory of shippers. I'm fine. What? I'm not crazy.
I can see that. But also, like a lot of these ones that we're talking about, like Game of Thrones and Harry Potter, they're all very long series. So I feel like a lot of the time readers or viewers get really attached to these characters through all the way out, and then no one can ever be satisfied with an ending because we all have different expectations for the show or the book series that there's no way that we can all be satisfied with it.
I think the longer the series, the greater room for disappointment there is.
Mm-hmm. I think
so don't write long series, guys.
Because I've read long series where I'm not completely satisfied with the ending, but what can you do about it?
Yeah.
I'm even thinking, I feel like most long series, even if I haven't read them, I've heard of people not liking the ending. Like I know True Blood, the Charlene Harris series. I've heard that a lot of people are very unhappy with how that book series ended. Because it felt forced. It felt like an ending the author had in mind for the series like early on, and by the
I'm telling you, that kills series. Don't decide your ending before you start for a 8, 9, 10 book series, whatever.
Or at least be willing to change the ending. Like you can have one in mind, but like holding on to an ending that doesn't work anymore, I feel like is a really common mistake of why so many endings end up not being satisfying to a lot of readers or viewers.
I agree. But back to kind of like the single book, like the one book. Is there anything we haven't covered about like the practicalities of like ways to screw up your ending and like ways to fix it? Like maybe we can like be helpful with some tips.
At what point do you guys actually start plotting out the ending? Because for me, it's right before I start writing the third act. I'm like, okay, so what am I heading towards here? What's the ending going to be? That's when I start planning out the ending. I don't know if it's going to be the same one in the next draft, but the bones are there.
Probably about the same time. I usually write my draft 0. I'll write like 80% of the book and like just be about to break into Act 3. And then like I'll like roughly know what I want to happen. But then I like go back to the beginning and start my like first draft revision of fixing my 0 draft mess. And that's usually around the point where I actually write a ending. So it's not until like I'm on my second draft kind of that I really tackle the ending aside from just knowing vaguely what happens.
Yeah, I'm similar. It's definitely kind of break into Act 3 where I start to solidify. Well, the thing is, I tend to only actually know up until the confrontation. Whatever the big confrontation is, I write toward that. And then after that, I either let the momentum of it carry me through to the end, which worked for the thriller, or both of my sci-fi books, I stopped right after the confrontation because I was stuck. Went back to the beginning, started editing my draft 0 because they always need work, and then wrote the ending once I caught up with myself because I needed to like read and build off of the emotions that I had built, remind myself, because it takes such a long time to write a book, at least for me. So especially like the second one, like that was a 9-month draft. So by the time I got to the end, I was like, I literally don't even know what this is. It's fine. But then the thing is, those endings, at least on the 2 sci-fis, changed multiple times. And like, I mean, completely. The ending of Brightly Burning, like the end of the third act, other than the epilogue I guess the last couple. The point is, I did major like structural changes to my third acts on both of the books being published. Like meaning I threw out entire chapters because they were info dumpy or boring, and I rewrote them to have higher stakes. It's usually for me stakes. My stakes aren't high enough in third acts because I'm tired.
Was the third act the one that you had to do the most rewriting on? Like, how was their second act? Did that also involve a lot of like rewriting and structural changing? Because for me, it's the second act where like all the unexpected things happen, and like I need to work through the second act before I know what exactly is going to happen in the ending.
On Brightly Burning, I didn't edit the second act that much. It was really just the third act, personally. But on Stars We Steal, I reworked a lot of the second act. Yeah, absolutely. Because, it was like, it's dominoes. Mm-hmm. Like, once you change something in Act 3, you're like, oh, darn, I have to earn this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And foreshadowing, we haven't talked a lot about foreshadowing, and that's part of earning it. Once you decide what the ending is, a large part of revision needs to be going back to the beginning and peppering in things in Act 1 and 2 so that the end makes sense. And I think that's work that writers skip. And that's when an ending like comes out of left field and slaps you in the face. You definitely need some foreshadowing.
I don't particularly read Victoria Aveyard's books, but I remember her talking about how she works with her like reveals and wrap-ups in threes. So there's always three things leading up to her big reveal that you could go back and you could point them out. And
the rule of three, which is a good one. Yeah.
I think that's a good piece of advice. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. No, that's a good one because
that reminds me too of try-fail cycles. Which often go in line with the rule of three, where like if you want your main character to like do something heroic at the end, they are able to use this power that they have discovered over the course of the book, and like they use it to defeat the bad guy. You need to have series of them trying and failing before they have that successful moment. So like that successful moment feels earned. And there's also a little bit of a question of like, will they succeed this time? Like, yes, because it's the finale of the book. And if they don't, we're all screwed. But we want to see them try and fail at least 2 occasions earlier on before they get that third victory success.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Because essentially once is a coincidence, twice is like head tilt, 3 times is the pattern. So 3 is a good number. We have some good questions in the chat from Victoria, starting with, this is good for you, Kat, because I know you do this. What do you think of endings that are parallel to the beginning? So opening image and closing image. Like, how do you set that up?
Very difficultly. And I think it almost comes, it's something that I naturally gravitate toward because I really love that in stories. I really love like a mirroring of a opening and a closing image, or just I love parallels. So I don't know. That's something that starts like in the idea stage, like before I even really start writing. I'm like, I'll be thinking about like, how do I start this book? How do I end it? And I usually, I don't know, just in like the brainstorming stage, I think of like what like a beginning and an ending might look like. And this is hard to explain without examples.
Lainey, do you do that too? Do you have examples?
I kind of do, I think. As you were talking about it, I'm like, I guess I do that. So like in my pirate book, kind of, I don't know, this could change. The endings could always change. But like I have them at one point in the same place and they're unchanged. And then at the end, they're going back to the same place, but completely changed. And that's one parallel. The one I just finished drafting, I have the beginning, she's really resistant to this certain thing. She doesn't want anything to do with it. But then at the end, I have her fully embracing that and being entrenched in it. So that's also kind of like a reverse parallel, I guess. But you see, yeah.
I have an example of one of mine. In the opening scene of the book, it was 3 friends kind of like escaping a school dance and like going to visit another friend who lived nearby who didn't go to the dance. And that friend ended up getting like murdered immediately after that. And the closing scene was those three friends going to visit that friend's grave. And so it was like a parallel of like them both going to visit the friend, bookended by her murder and like them solving the murder throughout it. So yeah, that's kind of like, it's just a kind of a setting or a thematic parallel. Right. Because like obviously what's going on in both scenes is very different.
Mm-hmm. Like the place can be the same, but the characters are what has changed.
Yeah. And then, like, you do that to just really like illustrate the change. Like, oh, in chapter 1 they were all like carefree and going to visit their friend, and now they're not carefree and still going to visit their friend. Not a good time.
Well, yeah, because it's about emotional catharsis. So doing the opening and closing image, those parallels can really contribute to that. I did the same thing in the thriller. It starts in the cafeteria and it ends in the cafeteria, and it's like the friends, but the dynamics have completely shifted. But I'll say my contrary opinion is that I've actually always hated those two beats on the beat sheet. Like, because it doesn't always fit organically to have parallels. And so my contrary opinion is when it fits, it's great. And it can be very cathartic and poetic to have parallels in the beginning and the end. But if you can't make it work, don't stress out. Not every book has it. Mm-hmm. Like Brightly Burning doesn't have that. It just didn't make sense or work. So like, as long as you're still having the emotional catharsis, it doesn't necessarily have to be a parallel image.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. That's not contrary at all.
Oh, good. Because I worry sometimes as I'm like, I skipped that beat. I'm a terrible person. But sometimes it fits and sometimes it doesn't. And I will say that with the thriller, though, I was like, oh, cool. I can finally write a closing image. Yes. It was very exciting. Another good question. Oh, this is a good one, too, actually. Do you think everything needs to be wrapped up, or is it okay to have some loose ends that aren't related to the main plot? This is a good question.
I think the character emotional arc needs to be complete, because that is what's going to satisfy the reader, whether that's good satisfaction or bad satisfaction. But I think you can leave some plot threads hanging.
Yeah, I would also agree that you can leave some threads hanging because that can feel natural, but it can't be the question that we're reading for. You know, like if we're reading a romance, then we don't want to know, like, did they get together in the end? Like, we want to know if they got together in the end. Or like the trilogy I mentioned earlier that has the girl disguised as a boy trope, and like we didn't get that like full reveal. I still enjoyed the trilogy overall because like there was a lot of other stuff going on, and like the overall arc was satisfying and like ended in a good place. It was just like this one thread that I was like, oh, but like I didn't get the payoff for what I thought that trope was promising me. So yeah, I think what Lainey said, like you need that main emotional beat, like has to be satisfied, but you can leave some things hanging.
Yeah, and in thrillers, because I've just been reading so many of them, for me it's balance. I don't necessarily expect the book to spoon feed me the answer to everything. Like, well, then he did this, and then he did that, and that clue actually meant this. And in fact, in The Lion Game, I think that's why I dislike so much that it was literally characters sitting around a table at a restaurant explaining everything, and I'm like, you should have shown this to me. I'm still mad. It's fine. But then, so you can spoon feed too much, but then we've all read one where there's not enough, where you just have so many questions that it renders the twist illogical. I hate that. So it's balance. You can have loose ends, but it can't be the loose end that if someone pulls it, it unravels your entire plot.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to wrap up? Because it's been an hour. Do we want to like finish up on a couple of questions?
Yeah, well, here's an interesting question that I don't quite know how to tackle. Is it okay to have an unsatisfying ending if it's realistic to the topics that your manuscript deals with well, or deals with?
That's a good question.
Yeah. See, I would argue that if it's the right ending for the story, then it's not unsatisfying. Like The word unsatisfying is very like loaded here. Like it could really go in one of two directions. Like, is it unsatisfying meaning unhappy ending? Or is it unsatisfying meaning like an unearned ending? Because I think an unhappy ending, or like one that like might some kind of like twist ending that isn't what people expected, like that could be fine. But an unearned ending, that kind of unsatisfaction probably won't go over well.
I agree completely. And I have a really good example that I can't give because I won't spoil this book. I read a book recently that basically has an unhappy ending, like meaning it's unsatisfying in the sense that the character is not vindicated, so to speak. But I found it incredibly satisfying because it wasn't satisfying, because the way it was done, I was like, this is a cool twist and an interesting conclusion to the emotional character arc, but it's I know it'll be unsatisfying for a lot of readers, but I liked it. I think with unsatisfying endings, you're just going to have love and hate camps on it, because essentially it's an authorial choice and it's a twist in a lot of ways. And some readers love endings like that.
Yeah, so it depends on if you're subverting expectations or if you're just like not earning what direction you go in. But yeah, that's an interesting, tricky question.
Also, I'll say that it depends on your genre or your category. Some categories don't support unsatisfying endings as much as others. So I'd say like sci-fi, it's actually almost a convention of the genre, like that your ending doesn't have to be like happy. You can definitely go with the trick twist ending. Thrillers, it really is definitely another genre where sometimes it doesn't go that way. But I'd say most YA, you have to have a happy or satisfying ending. Romance is another one. It has to be a happily ever after. No bittersweet endings in romance, or it's not a romance. It's just another category of book. But like, why? Meaning, because YA books have to end on hope, a hopeful note. It's a convention of the genre, the category. It's not a genre. So, meaning, it depends on what you're writing. It'll change, and you can always just like start as one thing and change what you're writing if you want to go with that ending. It becomes literary fiction instead of commercial romance.
That ending, if you do, like if you were initially writing a YA, but you end it in a way that's unconventional to the category and that isn't hopeful, it's like a very depressing downer ending, then that might just mean you didn't write YA, like you were writing something else.
An adult speculative novel with teen characters.
Yeah.
And you know what? I might be wrong. There might be some YA books with unsatisfying endings, like purposefully unsatisfying, not just like we didn't like them. But I can't think of any. So,
I mean, the big one that comes to mind is like Allegiant, which like so many people had a problem with because it ended in like such a depressing.
It really defies the conventions of the category, and I actually think that is why we had a strong reaction. And I'm like you, Kat. I'm not like automatically against how that book ended personally. It's just the execution was,
and it's not just the execution, it's also what we were promised. The first two books of the series were very like standard YA, like still hopeful, had like the dystopian elements with a romance, like it was very standard YA. And then the third book, it was like, now we're gonna switch things up. And like the people who were here for the standard YA didn't like that, and the people who would have liked that ending didn't get through the first two books because they weren't what they're into.
I think that ending would have sat perfectly in adult sci-fi. Personally. But then it would have been, you're right, it would have been a different series. The first two books would have had to have been different books.
Yeah, but I also think just with that book, there was a lot of structural that was not good, because it even didn't translate to the movies either, because the movie was a mess, and then they canceled.
You got that far in the movies?
You know what? Bill Skarsgård.
I gave up before that.
Well, Bill Skarsgård was in Allegiant, and that's what pulled me through. But I
never watched it because they split it into two movies.
Right.
And made the second
it's the foundation of that entire structure of the plot, and everything was weak, and it did not help transferring to the movie, because they canceled the second, the part 2.
Awkward.
That's kind of a potential problem area with endings in a series is that one ending in a later book can essentially cancel out like another book in the series, or just like render an entire book like doesn't matter anymore, kind of, which is a choice.
No, I hate it when you get a third book in a trilogy and it basically makes it incredibly obvious that the second book was filler. I hate that.
Yeah.
Hate it. Write a duology.
All the time. We used to see it all the time. Like duologies are more popular. But back around the time of Allegiant, everything was a trilogy. Allegiant was one of the ones that was initially pitched and sold as a standalone and then got expanded into a trilogy. So yeah, it's just people like fleshing out the story, and that's when the second act gets too meandering and gets too, that middle book is just, it's unimportant.
Yeah. All right. I think that's it for today. As always, drop any like questions or further comments you have down below. Some of them, they're just easier for us to answer as comments. Tune into the podcast. Our next episode is going to be going up not this week, but probably next week. We're going to be starting our like mini series on craft topics on the podcast. So we're really excited about that. You can subscribe to us on Patreon. We have a Discord now. So if you are a Patreon supporter, you can join our Discord where we talk about writing and whatnot, have a little community. Anything I'm missing?
Twitter.
Okay,
Twitter.
We'll like tweet out when our live show is going to be, but it's every other Sunday, so that doesn't change too often. And yeah, if you are a patron, then thank you, and also please ask us questions or suggest topics over there. We would love to hear more from you. Like, we're so happy that so many of you are becoming patrons and supporting us. But, in kind of exchange for that, we want to give you guys a little bit of like say in what we're doing and what we're talking about. So say some things. But yeah, that's going to do it for today. Follow our Twitter and our Patreon for announcements of when the next podcast and when the next live show will be happening. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.